I'm Claire Donovan. I'm 40 years old now, and there are still nights when I wake up hearing the sound of the hospital doors closing behind my husband. Not slamming. Not dramatic. Just that soft hydraulic hiss. Like the building itself swallowed him whole and decided I was the only one left outside. I was 8 months pregnant when Ethan told me our daughter wasn't his. I remember every detail because humiliation burns things into your memory in a way happiness never does. The fluorescent lights in the maternity wing parking lot made everyone look pale and sick. My ankles were swollen so badly I'd switched to cheap foam sandals because nothing else fit. I had one hand pressed against the bottom of my stomach because the baby had been kicking non-stop all afternoon. And Ethan stood 3 feet away from me with his jaw clenched, so tightly I could see the muscle twitching. "There's no point lying anymore," he said. People heard him. That's what stayed with me. A couple walking toward the entrance slowed down. A nurse near the smoking area looked over. Someone loading groceries into their trunk stopped moving. I remember whispering, "Please don't do this here." But he already had. "That baby isn't mine, Claire." The way he said it was worse than yelling. Calm. Measured. Like he'd already accepted it. Like I was the unstable one. I laughed at first. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes your brain rejects reality so violently it chooses the wrong reaction. "What? You heard me. I've never cheated on you." He shook his head slowly like I was embarrassing myself. "That's the thing," he said quietly. "You're such a good liar you probably believe yourself." I actually felt cold. Not emotionally. Physically. The kind of cold that starts behind your ribs. I stared at him for several seconds, trying to understand who I was looking at. Because Ethan had never been cruel. Detached sometimes. Avoidant. Passive-aggressive when stressed. But not cruel. Not like this. He looked exhausted more than angry. Like he'd been carrying something heavy for months. "I'm not doing this," I whispered. "You already did." Then he glanced at my stomach. That broke me. Not the accusation. That look. Like the baby inside me disgusted him. I remember putting both arms around my stomach instinctively. Like I needed to protect her from her own father. The nurse nearby finally looked uncomfortable enough to walk away. Ethan rubbed a hand over his face. "I can't keep pretending." "Pretending what?" "That this makes sense." "What doesn't make sense?" "The dates, the doctor appointments, the way you suddenly changed passwords on your phone." "I changed my password because you kept reading my work emails." "You started hiding things." "No, Ethan, you started looking for things." His eyes hardened. That was the first moment I realized this conversation had been happening inside his head long before I knew about it. He'd already convicted me. I just hadn't been informed yet. "I'm getting a DNA test," he said. I stared at him. "Fine. You don't even seem nervous." Because I hadn't done anything. But I was too tired to say it again. He took a step backward. "I can't stay with you right now." I felt panic rise immediately. "Ethan, I need space. You're leaving me here. It's not like you can't drive." I looked down at my swollen feet. Then back at him. I had contractions earlier. They said they were Braxton Hicks. The automatic doors opened behind him as another couple entered the building. Warm air rushed out. He didn't look at me again. That was the part that haunted me for years. He never looked back. Not once. I stood there crying silently in a maternity ward parking lot, while strangers pretended not to stare. And somewhere between the sound of his car pulling away and the ache in my lower back, I realized my marriage had ended before I even knew it was in danger. The worst part is that if you'd asked me 6 months earlier whether Ethan Donovan loved me, I would have said yes without hesitation. I met Ethan when I was 34, late enough in life that I thought I understood people. That's the embarrassing thing about betrayal. It makes you feel stupid in retrospect. We met at a fundraising dinner for a local literacy nonprofit. I worked in grant administration for a medical research foundation then, and Ethan handled financial compliance for a regional insurance company. He wasn't charming in an obvious way. Quiet, thoughtful, the kind of man who listened carefully before speaking. After years of dating loud men who loved hearing themselves talk, Ethan felt safe. Solid. He remembered tiny details. The first time I mentioned hatting raw onions, he started ordering burgers without them automatically. When I got migraines, he'd close the curtains before I even asked. He had this habit of rubbing small circles against the inside of my wrist when I was anxious. No one had ever paid attention to me like that. We married 2 years later. Nothing dramatic. Small ceremony. A rainy October afternoon. My mother cried through the vows. His parents barely spoke to me. I ignored that warning sign because people ignore warning signs when they're in love. Ethan's mother, Diane, had a way of looking at me like I was temporary. Not bad enough to confront. Just subtle. Disapproving. She once asked whether I worried about being an older mother while handing me mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving. I was 37. Ethan said she didn't mean anything by it. That became a recurring theme in our marriage. Other people hurt me. Ethan explained why I shouldn't feel hurt. Still, for years we were happy enough. Or at least I believed we were. We struggled with infertility for almost 3 years. That word still feels strange to say because Ethan refused to use it. Fertility issues sounded temporary. Infertility sounded permanent. We did tests, hormone treatments, scheduled sex that made intimacy feel clinical and humiliating. I cried in pharmacy parking lots over medication copays. I learned how to inject hormones into my own stomach, while Ethan looked away because needles made him uncomfortable. And through all of it, every doctor seemed to focus primarily on me. My body, my age, my stress, my hormone levels, my diet. Then one specialist finally suggested Ethan undergo more extensive testing. He came home furious. They think I'm the problem now. No one said that. It's always something. But he did the testing. And afterwards something changed. Not immediately. Gradually. Like watching warmth drain from water. He became withdrawn. Distracted. He started sleeping with his back toward me. Working late. Taking calls outside. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me strangely. Not lovingly. Not angrily. Just studying me. I asked him repeatedly what was wrong. He always blamed work. Then somehow, against every expectation we'd been given, I got pregnant naturally. I still remember sitting on the bathroom floor at 6 in the morning staring at the positive test with shaking hands. I thought it would fix everything. That's another humiliating truth. Women are trained to believe love can be repaired through endurance. A baby. Patience. Understanding. I woke Ethan up crying. He stared at the pregnancy test for several seconds. Then he hugged me. Tightly. Too tightly. At the time I thought he was overwhelmed. Now I know he was terrified. The first trimester was awful. I was constantly nauseous. Exhausted. Emotionally raw. But I was happy. Or trying to be. Ethan, meanwhile, became harder to reach emotionally every week. He attended the first ultrasound. Barely spoke during it. The technician pointed out the heartbeat, and I cried immediately. Ethan smiled for exactly 2 seconds. Then his expression closed again. That night he asked me something strange. Are you sure about the timing? I looked up from the couch. What? The pregnancy timing. Yes. You sure the doctors got it right? I laughed. They literally measured the embryo. He nodded slowly, but he looked unconvinced. That was the beginning. At 16 weeks he stopped touching my stomach. At 20 weeks he stopped coming to appointments regularly. At 24 weeks I found him going through my phone while I showered. He didn't even deny it. You've been weird for months, I told him. You're one to talk. What is that supposed to mean? Nothing. Everything became nothing. Every accusation. Every withdrawal. Every cruel implication. Nothing. Until the parking lot. Until he finally said it aloud. After he left me at the hospital, I drove home alone. I had to pull over twice because crying while heavily pregnant feels like suffocating. Your chest tightens too hard. The baby shifts uncomfortably. Your body can't fully collapse because another body depends on it. When I got home, Ethan's suitcase was gone. Not packed. Gone. He'd planned it. That realization hurt more than the accusation. He already knew he was leaving before he humiliated me publicly. There was an envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside were printed screenshots of text messages. Mine. Only they were edited. I didn't realize that immediately. At first glance, they looked authentic enough to make my stomach drop. Messages between me and a male coworker named Daniel. Except entire sections were missing. Context removed. Sentences rearranged. One message saying, "I miss you too," had been pulled from a conversation about my sister visiting from Seattle. Another message about last night referred to a fundraising event. But isolated together, it looked intimate. Suspicious. Calculated. There was a note attached in Ethan's handwriting. You can stop pretending now. I sat at the kitchen table for almost an hour staring at those pages. Then I threw up. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Into the sink. I think part of me still believed I could explain things. That if I stayed calm enough, rational enough, he would come back. But Ethan had already started telling people. That became obvious within days. My friend Natalie stopped answering texts. My mother called sounding confused. Claire, Ethan said there are concerns about the baby. Concerns. Like I was contaminated. Like I was a medical complication. I remember gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles hurt. He thinks I cheated. Long silence. Those. That tiny word nearly destroyed me. Because I heard uncertainty in it. Not belief. Not disbelief. Just discomfort. People always imagine innocence creates certainty. It doesn't. Sometimes innocence just makes you shocked, while everyone else quietly evaluates probabilities. Ethan was believable. That's what made it work. He wasn't explosive. He didn't rant. He sounded heartbroken. Reasonable. A man reluctantly facing painful facts. And I was emotional. Pregnant. Crying constantly. Which made me look unstable. I later learned he'd shown people the edited messages. Even his parents. Especially his parents. Diane called me exactly 1 week after the hospital incident. I answered because part of me still wanted someone from that family to love me. Claire, she said coolly, I think it would be best if you stopped contacting Ethan. I haven't. He needs peace right now. I didn't cheat on your son. Silence. Then a sigh. You know, when men reach this point, it's usually because they've been pushed there. I still remember sitting down slowly on the edge of the bed because my legs felt weak. What does that mean? I'm saying Ethan isn't irrational. He fabricated text messages. He showed us enough. Enough. Another awful word. I wanted to scream. Instead, I whispered, I'm carrying his child. Her response came immediately. If it's his. I hung up. Then cried so hard my stomach cramped. That night I ended up in labor triage because stress triggered contractions. A nurse named Patricia sat beside me while monitoring the baby's heartbeat. You need support at home, she said gently. I stared at the ceiling. My husband left. She didn't give me fake sympathy. That's why I liked her. She just nodded once. I'm sorry. Then after a pause, people can become strangers very quickly. I thought about that sentence for months afterward. Because she was right. One day you know someone's coffee order. The next day they're telling people your unborn child belongs to another man. Around 33 weeks pregnant, I finally stopped trying to convince Ethan. That was the turning point. Not revenge. Exhaustion. I realized every conversation ended with me defending reality itself. I would explain, cry, clarify, and Ethan would respond with calm suspicion, like a detective humoring a liar. One night he called unexpectedly. I answered immediately. Hope makes fools of people. I scheduled the DNA test after the birth, he said. No hellos. No how are you? I pressed my hand against my forehead. Okays. He sounded thrown off by my lack of resistance. That's it. What do you want me to say? The truth would be nice. I already told you the truth. You know what's interesting, he continued. Cheaters always act offended instead of scared. I closed my eyes. I'm tired, Ethan. You should be. Then he hung up. That conversation broke something final inside me. Not because it hurt. Because it sounded rehearsed. Like he needed me to remain guilty. Like my innocence threatened him somehow. I started noticing inconsistencies after that. Small things. Ethan suddenly obsessing over conception timing despite doctors confirming everything. His anger whenever infertility came up. His refusal to discuss his own test results. Then there were the finances. I discovered he drained a joint savings account 3 months before accusing me. Nearly $30,000. When I confronted him through text, he claimed it was for legal protection. Protection from what? A baby he claimed wasn't his. Except none of it aligned. If Ethan truly believed I cheated, why was he panicking months before the accusation? Why did he seem afraid instead of angry? And why did every conversation feel like he was following a script? The only person who still spoke to me consistently was my older neighbor, Ruth. Ruth was 68, widowed, blunt, and impossible to intimidate. She started knocking on my door every evening around 7, carrying food I rarely ate. Soup, casseroles, banana bread. One night she found me sitting on the kitchen floor crying beside the dishwasher. She didn't ask questions. She just lowered herself beside me with a groan and handed me a paper towel. You know what men fear most? She asked. I laughed bitterly. Commitment. No, exposure. I looked at her. They'll burn down entire lives protecting secrets nobody asked them to keep. At the time I thought she meant cheating. I didn't realize how accurate she actually was. My daughter, Lily, was born 3 weeks early during a thunderstorm. Ethan wasn't there. I called him 6 times. No answer. Eventually Patricia squeezed my shoulder and said softly, "Focus on getting through this." So I did. Labor is strange because your body overrides heartbreak temporarily. Pain becomes mechanical, primal. I remember gripping the rails of the hospital bed while rain hammered the windows. I remember thinking over and over, he's missing this. Not angrily, just hollow. When Lily finally arrived, tiny and furious and perfect, I cried so hard the nurse thought something was wrong. But it wasn't grief exactly. It was relief. She was real. After months of Ethan treating her like evidence, she finally existed outside accusation. A nurse placed her against my chest. Warm, heavy, breathing, mine. For 2 full days, Ethan didn't respond. Then on the 3rd morning, everything changed. I was half asleep in the hospital bed when Patricia entered with an expression I couldn't read. Claire, she said carefully, did Ethan Donovan receive your emergency contact paperwork? I think so. She hesitated. There was some confusion regarding blood work. My stomach tightened instantly. Is Lily okay? Yes, she's fine. Then Patricia glanced toward the hallway. Your husband called back after the lab contacted him. I frowned. What lab? The newborn screening department. Something in her tone shifted. They mentioned a name that upset him. I sat up slowly despite the pain. What name? Patricia looked uncomfortable. Angela Mercer. The room went completely still. I had never heard that name before, but apparently Ethan had. Because 30 minutes later he arrived at the hospital looking like someone had dug him out of a grave. Pale, sweating, shaking. I had spent months begging this man to care. Now suddenly he couldn't breathe. The moment he entered the room, his eyes went straight to Lily. Then to me. Who told you that name? He demanded. I stared at him. What? Who told you? I don't even know who that is. He looked genuinely disoriented. Not angry. Terrified. That scared me more than anything before. Patricia stepped into the hallway tactfully. Ethan dragged both hands through his hair. How did they connect her? He whispered. Connect who? No answer. Just panic. Raw panic. I had never seen Ethan lose composure before. Never. Not when his father had heart surgery. Not during layoffs. Not during fertility treatments. But now he looked seconds away from vomiting. Ethan, I said carefully, what is going on? He stared at Lily again. Then sat down heavily in the chair beside the window. She can't be mine. The sentence barely made sense. What? She can't. His voice cracked. And suddenly I understood something horrifying. He hadn't accused me because he believed I cheated. He accused me because he believed he couldn't have children. I felt cold all over again. The fertility testing, I whispered. Ethan covered his face. And finally, the truth started bleeding through. Months earlier, after additional testing, Ethan had been told he had severe fertility complications. Not impossible, but statistically unlikely. Instead of telling me, he spiraled. Then, according to him, he received anonymous messages suggesting I'd been involved with Daniel from work. Photos, edited screenshots, fake timelines, enough to feed his fear. I thought. He stopped speaking. You thought I trapped you with another man's baby. He nodded weakly. I wanted to hate him, but watching him unravel was surreal. Who's Angela Mercer? He looked physically ill. Then he whispered, my ex-girlfriend. The room seemed to tilt. She died 11 years ago. I said nothing. She got pregnant when we were together. My pulse started hammering. I thought she had an abortion. The silence afterward felt enormous. Then Ethan whispered the sentence that destroyed the rest of his life. She didn't. Apparently the newborn blood screening had flagged a rare hereditary marker, connected to a previous pediatric case in the hospital system. A child registered years earlier under Angela Mercer. A child Ethan never knew existed. His daughter, alive. The room spun. For months this man had accused me of cheating because he believed he was infertile. Meanwhile, he already had a child somewhere. A child he abandoned without even knowing. And now our newborn daughter accidentally exposed it. I stared at him in disbelief. You destroyed my life because you were wrong. Ethan started crying. I had never seen him cry before. Not once. But I felt nothing. Or maybe I felt too much. You told everyone I cheated. Claire, you left me alone. I didn't know. You wanted me guilty. That landed. Because it was true. If I cheated, then his fear made sense. If I cheated, then he remained the victim. If I cheated, he never had to face his own shame. His own secrets. His own failures. He started apologizing then. Rapidly. Messily. But apologies sound grotesque when someone's holding a newborn they survived pregnancy alone to protect. I asked him to leave. Quietly. No screaming. No dramatic breakdown. I just pointed toward the door. And Ethan obeyed. The next several weeks felt unreal. Like living inside someone else's scandal. Because once Ethan's panic cracked open, everything underneath it started collapsing too. The anonymous messages sent by his sister Melanie. She accessed his email months earlier after he drunkenly confessed his fertility fears. Melanie hated me. Not openly. Subtly. The same way Diane did. She believed I married Ethan for stability. For money. For security. So when Ethan spiraled emotionally, Melanie fed it. She fabricated screenshots. Created fake accounts. Sent anonymous tips. And Ethan believed them because they aligned perfectly with what terrified him most. That revelation should have felt satisfying. Instead, it made me feel sick. Because none of these people needed proof. They just needed permission. Once Ethan started suspecting me, everyone else followed. Even people who supposedly loved me. Especially them. Natalie finally visited 2 weeks after Lily's birth. She stood awkwardly in my living room, holding flowers from a grocery store. I didn't know what to think, she admitted. I sat on the couch rocking Lily gently. You could have asked me. I know. You believed him. She looked ashamed. He sounded convincing. That sentence mattered more than she realized. Because betrayal isn't only about the person who hurts you. It's about discovering how easily everyone else accepts your destruction. Natalie started crying. I'm sorry. And the awful thing is I believed she meant it. People aren't evil most of the time. They're weak. Cowardly. Afraid of conflict. Afraid of choosing wrong. So they follow the narrative that feels safest. Ethan's narrative had sounded cleaner. Logical husband. Emotional pregnant wife. Possible affair. It fit neatly into people's expectations. The truth was messier. And uglier. Ethan started trying desperately to repair things after the hospital revelation. Daily texts. Voicemails. Flowers. Letters. He wanted therapy. Family counseling. Another chance. But something fundamental had died inside me. Not love exactly. Trust. I couldn't unknow what he was capable of. I couldn't unknow how calmly he watched me collapse. One evening he showed up at my house unexpectedly while Ruth was visiting. Ruth opened the door before I could. She took one look at Ethan and crossed her arms. You got some nerve. I need to talk to my wife. Ruth glanced backward toward me. She looks busy raising the child you accused her of inventing. Ethan flinched visibly. Good. I walked to the doorway slowly, Lily sleeping against my shoulder. He looked wrecked. Dark circles, wrinkled clothes, weight loss. But pain looked different on him now. Smaller, less important. I made a mistake, he said quietly. I almost laughed. A mistake. Forgetting milk is a mistake. Accusing your pregnant wife of infidelity and abandoning her publicly is a campaign. You destroyed me, I said. Tears filled his eyes immediately. I know. No, you don't. My voice stayed calm. That seemed to hurt him more. You made me defend my own dignity while pregnant. I was scared. So was I. Silence. Lily stirred softly against my chest. Ethan looked at her with unbearable longing. And for the first time, I understood something devastating. He genuinely loved her now. Too late. Far too late. The legal fallout began shortly afterward. Not because I wanted revenge initially. Because I needed survival. I filed for separation. Then custody. Then financial disclosure. That was when another secret surfaced. Ethan had been moving money for nearly a year. Not illegal exactly, but deceptive. Large transfers into an account his mother co-managed. Hidden debts. Credit lines opened without discussing them. And suddenly his behavior during my pregnancy made even more sense. He wasn't only afraid of infertility. He was drowning financially. The possibility of fatherhood terrified him because his life was already unstable. Instead of admitting vulnerability, he chose suspicion. Because suspicion made him feel powerful, victimized, justified. I stopped protecting him after that. That's important. For months I'd still softened details when speaking to people. He was confused. He panicked. He's struggling. Then one afternoon, I found out Diane had continued implying Lily might not be Ethan's despite the DNA results. Not directly. Just carefully. She supposes tests can be wrong sometimes. That was it. Something inside me finally hardened. I gathered every piece of evidence. The edited screenshots. The anonymous accounts linked to Melanie. The financial records. The DNA confirmation. Text messages. Voicemails. And then I stopped staying silent. Not loudly. Strategically. When mutual friends asked what happened, I told them. Calmly. Fully. When Diane implied infidelity at a family gathering, I handed Ethan's aunt printed copies of Melanie's fabricated evidence. I watched understanding spread across faces one person at a time. No screaming required. Truth does its own violence eventually. The real collapse happened during Ethan's cousin's engagement party. I almost didn't attend. But Ethan's Aunt Marion convinced me. People should see Lily, she said quietly. So I went. I wore a plain navy dress because none of my old clothes fit yet. I still carried pregnancy weight. I still looked exhausted. But I walked in holding my daughter without shame for the first time in months. Conversations stopped. Not dramatically. Just little pauses. Whispers. People knew enough by then. Ethan arrived 20 minutes later. The moment he saw me holding Lily, something in his face crumpled. Then Diane approached me. Wrong choice. Claire, she said stiffly, perhaps this isn't the appropriate setting. I looked at her calmly. For what? She glanced at Lily. I understood instantly. That old implication again. After everything. I reached into my purse. Removed a folder. and handed her the DNA results in front of half the room. The silence afterward felt electric. Diane stared at the papers, then at Ethan. Ethan looked physically sick. I spoke softly. You owe me an apology. Not angry. Not loud. Just true. And suddenly, everyone was looking at them instead of me. That was the moment the narrative shifted permanently. Because humiliation changes direction once proof arrives. Melanie left the party crying. Diane barely spoke. And Ethan followed me outside afterward into the cold evening air. I never wanted this, he whispered. I laughed quietly. Yes, you did. He looked stunned. You wanted me guilty because guilt protected you from yourself. That's not true. It is. I adjusted Lily against my shoulder. You were so terrified of being inadequate that you made me monstrous instead. That sentence hit him harder than anything else ever had. Because deep down, Ethan already knew. The next year was slow. Messy. Not triumphant. People think revenge feels exciting. Mostly it feels exhausting. Depositions, custody agreements, lawyers, financial negotiations. There were nights Lily cried for hours, while I sat on the kitchen floor trying not to cry with her. There were moments I almost answered Ethan's late-night apologies. Moments I missed the version of him I thought existed. But every time I started doubting myself, I remembered the parking lot. The fluorescent lights. His expression. The way he left while I held our daughter inside me. That memory anchored me. Eventually more truth surfaced about Angela Mercer too. Ethan located the daughter he never knew he had. Her name was Sophie. She was 10. Angela had died from an aneurysm years earlier. Sophie's grandmother had raised her. Apparently Angela never told Ethan about the pregnancy because he'd panicked during a previous conversation about commitment and fatherhood. That knowledge shattered him. Not publicly. Privately. Quietly. You could see it in the way he moved afterward. Like someone permanently carrying invisible weight. For a long time I wanted him destroyed completely. Then eventually I realized life had already done it. Not because of me. Because truth arrived all at once. He lost his marriage. His reputation. Years with his daughters. His relationship with multiple relatives after Melanie's manipulation surfaced. And worst of all, he lost the version of himself he believed existed. The rational man. The good husband. The victim. That identity collapsed publicly. I think that hurt him more than divorce ever did. About 18 months after Lily was born, Natalie admitted something to me over coffee. You know what made me finally realize you were telling the truth? What? She stirred her drink nervously. You never tried too hard to convince anyone. I frowned. At first I thought that made you suspicious, then I realized you were just exhausted. That stayed with me. Because innocence often looks tired. Not dramatic. Not persuasive. Just deeply, deeply tired. The final conversation I had with Ethan happened 2 years later, outside Lily's preschool. Rainy afternoons. Children screaming somewhere nearby. Very ordinary. He looked older. Not physically. Emotionally. Like regret had settled permanently into his posture. I don't expect forgiveness anymore, he said. I nodded. That's probably healthy. A sad smile flickered briefly. I really did love you. I believed him. That was the tragedy. People imagine cruel men don't love anyone. Sometimes they do. They just love themselves more when fear enters the room. Ethan looked toward the playground, where Lily ran in circles wearing a yellow raincoat. I missed so much. Yes. He swallowed hard. I'll regret that forever. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Just clarity. Because he finally understood. Not intellectually. Emotionally. There's a difference. The humiliation he caused me never fully disappeared. Even now, certain memories still make my chest tighten. Automatic hospital doors. Fluorescent lighting. The smell of antiseptic. But shame changed direction eventually. It stopped belonging to me. That took time. And distance. And surviving long enough to understand that another person's fear is not proof of your guilt. Lily is 6 now. Sometimes she asks why her father looks sad in old photos. I never know how to answer that. How do you explain adult cowardice to a child? How do you explain that people can love you and still destroy you because they're terrified of themselves? Mostly I just kiss the top of her head and say grown-ups make mistakes. Which is true. Though some mistakes arrive wearing the face of betrayal. Last winter Lily fell asleep on the couch after a Christmas movie. The house was quiet. Snow outside. Soft yellow lamplight. I carried her upstairs slowly because she was getting too big for it. Halfway to her bedroom, she wrapped sleepy arms around my neck and whispered, "You always keep me safe." I had to stop walking for a second. Because after everything, the accusations, the humiliation, the loneliness, the months of feeling insane, that was the only thing that truly mattered. Not revenge. Not vindication. Not even being believed. Just that my daughter would grow up never doubting she was wanted. Never doubting someone would stay. I tucked her into bed and stood there listening to her breathe. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty anymore.